Okay, so selling solar thermal. Really, the crunch of my discussion is all about the return on investment and the calculations. If I can find the right button. Okay, so whenever I've been talking to solar thermal installers, their biggest gripe is how does solar thermal compare with PV? Because the PV tariff, FIT tariff has been around for 3 years now, and everyone's seen the graphs. You can see how much deployment there has been going on. So the way we've constructed this is to bite the bullet and compare solar thermal as we see it with PV. And this is where it stood sort of in the middle of last year. This is probably your largest PV type install at 4 kilowatts, using an 850 yield over 20 years, 16 pence tariff, at the time about £7,000 install, and you can see the feed-in tariff that it's generating, the exports, and you get a whopping 11.1% return on investment. So that is a very good return by any stretch of the imagination, and that is really the financial competition that solar thermal has been up against. So now on the right-hand side, you see what we considered DECC's best case scenario under the 17.3 pence that it's consulted on last year. You'll see the 1280 kilowatt hours being generated and also saved. It's based on a 4-person occupancy home, so a larger size home, but again we're trying to compare with the best case scenario on the PV. We're using oil at 8 pence, we're using the 7-year RHI, and the typical cost we think is around about £4,500. So once you add in the maintenance, and then you get your £1,500 of RHI. Now that's still a lot higher than the £300. And note that this is the cumulative costs over this whole period, so it's effectively over this whole 7-year period. And also own usage, that was sort of calculated based in the old way, based on the old dealing methodology. But noticeably there isn't a payback, and it makes a 3.5% loss in terms of return on investment. So you can see that the challenges we've had, and Stuart and I have spent many months debating with DECC, trying to ensure that they do include solar thermal as part of the RHI, because under these circumstances you can see why it's far easier just to ignore it, hand over a grant and say thanks very much for coming along. But we're going to do better than that. So what's changed since that consultation? And Stuart has been through most of these, but we've able to get a slightly higher RHI from 17.3 up to 19.2. And yes, we are hoping that that tariff will go up a little bit more. It is based on occupancy rather than the size of the house. There is this recognition of the understated hot water usage that Stuart alluded to earlier on. And there's this boiler efficiencies. Now I know Stuart's mentioned about that. For those of you who are not familiar with the concept of boiler efficiencies, perhaps another example I'd like to give is if you were to drive your car to the station every day, your engine probably won't heat up enough to make it efficient. So rather than getting 35 to 40 miles per gallon, you're getting more like 20, 25 miles per gallon. Well, it's the same way with a boiler. In the winter time, it's running hard, it's at its most efficiency. That's where you get your 90%. But in the summertime, you're only switching your boiler on to heat the hot water. And that's where the 77% comes in. And as Stuart pointed out, that's where most of this summer effect of the hot water comes in. We've also decided, rather than making it over 20 years, let's look at the life of 25 years. Because let's face it, good quality kit, properly installed and well maintained, will last for 25 years and beyond. And that's something we should be broadcasting out there to our industry. And the other area which Stuart didn't mention and we brought into my presentation was this sort of recognition of upgrading the cylinder or the hot water storage. Back in 2009, DECC commissioned a consultation on efficiencies of condensing boilers and the secondary heating systems, for example, solar thermal. And it was done by the Energy Savings Trust. And the conclusion of that was, if you replace an old cylinder with a new cylinder, on average, you will be saving about 750 kilowatt hours per year. And of course, what we forget with solar thermal is that On the majority of installs, I know there are 3 or 4 different types of products on the market, but in the majority of cases, you have to replace a cylinder from an old one to a new one. And invariably, you are going to be gaining the benefit of that 750 kilowatt hours, or if you factor in the boiler efficiencies, it's more like 833. So on the right-hand side, you see there's a portion which is from government, which is the RHI. You've got this additional benefit from boiler efficiency, and you've got this rather large amount that comes in from cylinder losses. So the bill savings are really quite substantial. And you've all seen these old boilers out there, and there's a classic old copper, poorly insulated, full of all furred up, and needs replacing. So if you've got one of those, your customer's got one of those, you tick the box, and you can allow that as being a very big benefit to the customer. This is a beautifully brand new installed new home exemplar eco build, and you see the nice polyurethane tank there. Part of the reason for showing this is that you would expect these pipes not to be painted silver, because silver isn't exactly going to keep them more efficient and keep the heat losses. But under the new MCS guidance that's just come out, you would not, as an installer, be allowed to leave that as it stands. You'd have to fully insulate all the pipework connected with the cylinder and the solar thermal system. So what does this mean in terms of numerics? Well, on the left-hand side, this was the best case scenario that we talked about earlier from DEC. And now on the right-hand side, we're taking exactly the same install. So this is still your 4 occupancy home. They're still on oil. It's still over 7 years for the RHI. But what we've done is factor in all of these extra deeming calculations. So you see this extra 1,000 kilowatt hours that have been recognised in a slightly larger install with a 4-person property. Notice the higher saved energy of nearly 2,900 kilowatt hours. And as I said, we factored this over 25 years, so we can really look at the true benefit of the solar thermal system. Cost is the same, £4,500, but notice the RHI increase there. It's another £800, of which only 2 pence is associated with that increased tariff. The majority of the difference is all about the extra deeming that's been brought about. Notice the cylinder energy in there. So that is 833 kilowatt hours times the offset of oil times the 15 years, which we've given it as being the sort of the beneficial upgrade. Whether it's 10 years, 20 years with a cylinder, it's a bit difficult to really argue that, but we've chosen to go with a conservative 15 years. And then look at the own usage. You know, a huge increase in comparison to the way the old methodology was looked at. And now we have a whopping £5,500 higher net benefit than we did in the previous case, giving you a real return on investment of just over 8%. So for the first time, we do have something which is getting close to what PV will do for us. So, you know, I think that's a fairly sizable number. And note, it's only £800 extra that we're asking from government. I'm not saying that we don't need this extra tariff, so before you get all cosy there, you know, a typical home is perhaps more like 3 people. So the return on investment on the left-hand side and the household occupancy on the bottom there. The green line is, although DEC haven't exactly set a 7.5% return on investment, it's like a hurdle rate, it's like the cost of borrowing. So that's really where the other technologies, biomass, heat ground source, are being compared. And you see the sweet spot for us is around the 4-person home, but not so good for a 2-person home, but incredibly good for a 6-person home. We've put in gas as well. There is about a 2.5–3% reduction. So gas, it is not the target of the renewable heat incentive, but over time with reduced cost of installs, you know, I think gas will become a lot more competitive for solar thermal. So let's look at a scenario where all the stars on the planets align. Let's say you have the maximum occupancy home, which is in fact capped out at 6 people. I know they are 6 children, but if you have 6 children, generally you'll have at least 1 or 2 adults in the home. If you have a if you live in the south of the country, and you are on oil, and you have a very old cylinder, and your house is exactly south-facing, well, you get a very large 2,400 kilowatt hour per year generation that you'll get from the solar thermal system. And over a 25-year life, you'll be getting on average just over 3,000 kilowatt hours of energy saved, which gives you another £9,000. Factor in 15 years of energy savings on the cylinder. Take in the cost, about £5,000 for an install, plus what we think is about £990 to maintain that system over the 25 years, replacing the guide pole, replacing the pump, etc. And you've got 11.5%, and you're right there. You're right competing up against PV. I know we shouldn't be trying to compete with PV, but in terms of trying to persuade you as installers, we have to get you back off that PV shelf and that mantra back into the world of solar thermal, because as you can see from a financial perspective, it is far, far better than it has ever been before. So moving on, selling solar thermal. It's been 4 long, dark, lonely years out there. And you may well have come into this lecture hall today with your head in the sand, but I hope that you might decide to change your methodology in terms of the way you sell solar thermal. Perhaps the aggressive approach isn't everyone's thing, but I think shouting out about is something to do. But we should also point out that solar thermal has suffered, like some of the other technologies out there, from mis-selling. And it is a complex technology, or in my mind it's a complex technology to convince customers of all the benefits. So, please be careful. There are some reliable people out there, but in my view, it all comes down to trust. If we can gain the end customer's trust and explain to them how it works, then I think we're going to go a long way to increasing the deployment levels. So I'm not here to teach you how to sell solar thermal, but we're hopefully here just to give you what's in the toolbox. And just to summarize in terms of what's changed, as of now, you don't have £300 to convince a customer to go and install solar thermal. You've now got anywhere between £1,300 and just over £3,000 for the RHI, and that's just from government. It's now an occupancy, so that's a big, big uplift. We've got this recognition of the understated hot water usage. We've got seasonal efficiency. We've got the upgraded cylinder. We've got a 25-year usage life. But there are also other sweet spots out there. Chap on the left is upgrading the whole central heating system in a home. So at the same time, it makes absolute sense to install solar thermal. It can save a lot of money. The cylinder's probably going to be replaced anyway. On the right-hand side, an old roof that needs repairing. Well, it makes sense to go and repair that roof and add solar thermal at the same time. And we should also remember there are a lot of friends out there in terms of other technologies. These are all the people that like solar thermal, and there are many more. Boiler manufacturers are probably quivering in their boots right now because they are having to compete, or will be competing in terms of the RHI for biomass and for air and ground source heat pumps. So solar thermal doesn't replace your boiler, but it complements it. Arguably it's the same for biomass. It's perhaps not the best, most efficient use of a biomass boiler in the summertime to be burning wood chips to heat your solar thermal, to heat your hot water system. Same with ground source. Fantastic, extract heat from the ground at 12 degrees, but again in the summertime, probably better to be using solar thermal. And of course, PV and solar thermal can work quite well in conjunction together, whether that's PVT or whether that's just saving some space on the roof for solar thermal. That's our slogan. We've got another thing in the toolbox which we've now launched today at the SDA stand over at A34. It's this 1 million solar roofs by 2015. And surprisingly enough, it wasn't very easy to establish how many solar thermal systems had been installed year to date. So a little bit on the back of a fag packet, we came up with about 200,000 solar thermal installs cumulatively to date. There are about 465 to 470,000 PV systems. So altogether that's about 675,000 installs. So if we can increase the solar thermals installs over the next couple of years, and certainly PV should be increasing over the next few years, it is a genuine and realistic target. This website, yourroof.info, has been set up and it is basically commercially neutral. The idea is we want you as installers to steer your customers to that. In other words, if you don't believe us, go and check out Your Roof. And we've got a lot of educational videos on there. There's a solar calculator. It's still a bit work in progress. There's more stuff to go and add, but It's a tool that you can use. We also have this is a little bit of a plug for the SDA, there's a solar thermal workshop which we've set up on the 27th of November. Free to all members, so if you're not a member, time to join. So we're going to be discussing things like this deeming methodology that Stuart was talking about, the return on investment calculations that we put through, because there are a series of assumptions in there which we think are right, but we do need feedback from you as to whether this is the right way to be presenting this to the end customer. We have we're going to be working with the HHIC on looking at hot water cylinder upgrades and the amount of real energy savings through a hot water cylinder. Looking at the MCS standards and then other ways that we can think of to sell solar thermal. So that's me. Please visit our stand over at A34. Thanks very much for listening to me today, and if there